So as we discussed the issue further, we found that in areas primarily rural, this is the experience of the youth, in areas where the youth were known to the adults, those experiences did not occur because adults in those communities knew all of the young people by name. But as you get in more densely populated areas where you have a greater movement of people, perhaps over bigger distances, or they live distances apart, and that knowledge is not known, then there tends to develop this sort of disconnect. And that's why I say that it's not just an issue of culture within the school, but it's an issue of culture relative to the whole community. And I'll pick up there after, and I'll move the adjournment of the debate.
Thank you, Minister. It's now time for the moment of interruption. We'll be back at 6:30 sharp. Thank you.
We've reached the moment of interruption. The honourable member for Cape Breton Nova.
Mr. Speaker, I have before me an interesting proposition to address. It reads, therefore be it resolved that the Tory government has abandoned Nova Scotia's rural roads, period. End of quote. Well, it may not say much in words, but it encompasses a great deal. I know that recently I was advised, I don't know if I myself was advised, maybe it was the McEwen Espionage Services, of a certain poll that was taken off the record to identify the most important issue in the upcoming election. And issue number 1 was health. And issue number 2 was education. And issue number 3 was roads. Yes. But I understand that roads are rising. And the other issues are perhaps somewhat falling. Because people are more concerned about the condition of the roads on a day-to-day basis than they are with the hospitals, except those that have immediate health needs. Likewise with education, perhaps all are in a general way concerned with it, yes, but the condition of the roads is something that you're very much aware of day by day as you attempt to use them. Now, I don't see, well, I won't say about the minister. I'll just say about the roads. I try to navigate them myself daily. And I notice that, well, I'm going to take highway number 28 because that's a very interesting highway, Mr. Speaker. It begins at Ashby Corner in Sydney and ends at Senator's Corner in Glace Bay. It goes, therefore, from corner to corner.
Why is it called Senator's Corner?
Well, I don't know, but I'll find out. How's that? As the Minister of the Crown would say, I shall look into it and report back in due course. Yes. Maybe the member for Glace Bay knows that one. Yes. Well, I understand it would be a great sign location. Yes, indeed. But it was also the occasion on at which people used to fight with their fists at election time over the various parties opposing each other. So I don't know if it was senators or not that undertook those particular fistfights. Perhaps not. Perhaps they were spectators. while they cast bets on who would win. Getting back to highway number 28, it goes from Ashby Corner in Sydney to Senators Corner in Glace Bay by way of New Waterford and passes through that very interesting community, as well as the communities of Scotchtown and River Ryan and Gardner Mines, where it's called Seaside Drive, and in New Waterford, or in the area leaving New Waterford, it's called Union Highway. Now, don't ask me what union that was. Hopefully not one that gave money to the NDP, but that remains to be determined. It then goes through the town of Dominion, which I still call the town of Dominion and always will, and goes on into the town of Glace Bay, where it is known as Main Street. So we have a road here that has many names, but we'll get you from Sydney to Glace Bay the roundabout way. Now, this highway is zoned for 80 kilometers per hour, is the speed on which to drive over it for most of its distance. I'm not saying within the town of Glace Bay. I never got a ticket in Glace Bay yet, but I'm sure if I drove at 80 kilometers an hour down Main Street in Glace Bay, I would. Yes. And then there was the town of Dominion, which was always known somewhat as a speed trap. You'd better not drive over 50 kilometers an hour through there, or you'd be nabbed. The rest of it, parts of it might be lower in speed than 80. I know that the parts approaching New Waterford and going through New Victoria are zoned as 60, and the parts coming out of New Waterford, depending on which way you're going, in either direction, are also zoned at 60. So you can probably travel half this highway at 80, and the rest of it probably at less than 80. But the point is that going from Sydney to New Waterford, or vice versa, most of the distance is zoned at 80 kilometers per hour. And on that highway, which was rebuilt in the good old days of the Liberal government, from New Waterford to Sydney, the total distance, every time you go over a culvert, the road goes down about 2 feet. About. Sometimes less, sometimes more, but around that distance. Because the ballast that was used over the culverts was not of the same recipe as the ballast used over the rest of the highway. See? So you have a series of level sections followed by slight drops, followed by level sections, followed by slight drops. All of this is still zoned at 80 kilometers an hour. Results for those who travel at the maximum speed limit tolerated is multiple damage to the undercarriage of their cars. Flat tires on occasion, and generally they get all shook up, as Elvis Presley used to sing. All shook up. Now, that is the condition that highway is in. Now, I see other honorable members listening to what I'm saying because I know that they're thinking of roads like that in their constituency. They're the same way. Because at this time of the year, as the frost comes out of the ground, and in the last couple of months with the extreme low temperatures that we had, it has an effect on pavement. And if I had the time, Mr. Speaker, which I don't, I could give you a scientific lecture on how frost affects pavement. But it's not conducive to the bonding process. It's conducive to the opposite, to the pavement breaking up, to the development of potholes and other such encumbrances. Do I see a signal to me? Oh, I just started, Mr. Speaker, just started.
10 seconds.
All right, well, there is much opportunity for the government to act. We look forward to their action in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you. The honourable member for Shelburne. I'm sorry. Yarmouth, I just seen you were paying attention to this, Yarmouth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
For Yarmouth.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to rise in my place today to speak on this resolution. Mr. Speaker, in the former government from 93 to 99, if I recall correctly, there was a minister from Shelburne area that was the Minister of Transportation. I think his real title should have been Natural Resources, because I believe the only thing that the member ever did was clear-cut a swath through Barrington. That's the only thing, to my recollection, that he did. But let me tell you what the good member from 99 to 2003 from Shelburne has accomplished, and as a backbencher, a hard-working backbencher. He's had his road paved from the Queens to Shelburne County line to the Sable River Bridge. He had the River Head Road in Barrington repaved. He had the Forbes Point Road paved that the former minister promised prior to the 1999 election he'd have paved. Mr. Speaker, the only thing that I know that the minister of the day did for Shelburne, he closed the service station or the area garage that he had in Shelburne and moved it to Bridgewater. That was quite nice of him to do. Mr. Speaker, the service garage, that's right, in Shelburne. He moved it from Shelburne to Bridgewater. That was very nice of the minister to do for his people in Shelburne. Mr. Speaker, in the RIM funding that was implemented by this government after 1999 has paid big dividends to Shelburne area and to my area, Yarmouth. It's hit just all the outlying communities. There's been more gravel work, there's been more bush cutting, culverts, ditching in areas that was neglected for 10 years prior to, and that RIM funding has paid tenfold to these little communities in the outlying areas. And Mr. Speaker, when this government took office, there was approximately $36 million in capital spent on highways in the province of Nova Scotia. Today, our government, with the new budget that was introduced, be $116 million for capital investments in the highways in the province of Nova Scotia. $10 million into the RIM funding, Mr. Speaker. $1 million for cost sharing with municipalities, which I was fortunate enough to have one of those projects last year in my community, and the people are very grateful. And that's the only way that a J roads in this great province are ever going to see blacktop, and that's partnering. And they did partner with the municipality of the District of Yarmouth, the residents of the community, and the province of Nova Scotia. And the people are very, very thankful to this government for doing that project for them. Mr. Speaker, this government has cut a deal with the federal government for doing the 100 series highways, which the former government forgot to do. $61 million was just announced last week, Mr. Speaker. We are going to enhance the highway system for the 101 through the valley, which they call the Death Highway. There's going to be some new overpasses in southwest Nova. There's work to be done on the 104. Mr. Speaker, what happened to the government from 1993 to 1999? Why was there not a deal with the federal government for highway work in this great province? New Brunswick seemed to get their share, but the province of Nova Scotia sort of laid back and just let it go. Well, Mr. Speaker, in the Yarmouth area, the Lake George Road was one of the roads that the people were the most vocal prior to the 1999 election. Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to stand here in my place today and say that road has been completed by this government. Mr. Speaker, the next road, the priority that's set by the community and the councils and the Department of Transportation in Yarmouth was the Hard Scratch Road. It's a very busy stretch of road. It's a shortcut for the inland areas, for the communities to go through to town, to the center of our community. It's developed. It's our composting facility. It's our landfill is out through there. The new quarries are out through. It's growing. And that road was earmarked to be the next priority. Well, Mr. Speaker, I am proud to say here today that that road is going to see new blacktop in the year 2003. The contract's been awarded. The blacktop will be there this year, and it was awarded last year. And, Mr. Speaker, this is not an election promise. Ever since I've been elected, since 1999, every year we've had road work in Yarmouth. Where prior to that, prior to 1999, Mr. Speaker, we had $865,000 spent in capital in Yarmouth County. $865,000. We had a minister from the southwest area. But he must have forgot that he was a minister for the whole province because he forgot the riding of Yarmouth. And there was a sitting member from the Liberal Party from Yarmouth. And what happened? He couldn't even get ditching done on the Moods Mill Road. Yeah. maybe you should do so. Maybe you should do so. Because, Mr. Speaker, whenever the election's called in 2003, I want to assure you that this member will be standing in this place back in this legislature after the election, Mr. Speaker. Because I did exactly what I told the people in 1999 I would do, Mr. Speaker, and that's stand up for the people of Yarmouth and work for the people of Yarmouth and listen to the concerns of the people of Yarmouth. And, Mr. Speaker, I have never backed down from one debate on the people for Yarmouth. I walked into a delegation of over 1,000 people that were upset because of misinformation about closing the school in Yarmouth. I want to tell you, today that school's still open, and it will be open tomorrow, Mr. Speaker. And I did not back down from those people. That some people put false rumors through my community, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, that's a representation that the people from Yarmouth wanted. That's a representation the people from Yarmouth have got, and that's a representation the people from Yarmouth will have after the next general election. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The honourable member for Timberlea Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I look forward to a few moments. I'm aware that the member from Cape Breton the Lakes is going to make some comments, so I understand I have less time than our usual amount during late debate. The previous member, it's good to see him stand in his place. I wish the member from Queens would participate in this debate, though. I wish that the other members in the back benches would replace, because, you know, ministers of transportations come and go, and I don't really think it's appropriate, from my view, Mr. Speaker, having had the opportunity to be in this House for 2 sessions, to in a way make disparaging comments about the previous Minister of Transportation. I want to make it very clear that the Minister of Transportation in the previous Liberal government, during estimates and during questions and answers that we had in this House at that time, was a very credible Minister of Transportation. And I say that, I put it on the record. I understand that Mr. Huskelson had limited dollars. Maybe he didn't get listened to at the door, or at the cabinet door. I'm sure he got in there and he got listened to on occasion, for sure. But I want the government members on the opposite side to know it's no time to start pointing fingers and talking about priority lists here. We're talking about the fact that people all across Nova Scotia want fairness and they want openness. That's what they want. And I heard the member from Yarmouth say that the priority for his community, according to the municipal council and toward the residents, was a particular road. And that's great to hear, because most municipal councils, whether it's within the HRM or where the previous warden of the Yarmouth Council operated, and that's the MLA from Yarmouth now, established that priority. And it's open and you can see it. But where it goes once it gets to the Department of Transportation, that's where the concerns begin. Because I can take you on a tour of my riding, and I can tell you that there are, without doubts, and there was money assigned to Timberlea Prospect. I know the member from beautiful Colchester Musquodoboit Valley says that there was all kinds of teaspoons of pavement in the riding of Timberlea Prospect, the 20 to the 103 announcement, the 7 kilometers on the Prospect Road, which of course is on the way to Peggy's Cove. Those announcements and those projects were done because they had to be done. Because the engineers within the Department of Transportation have decided that based upon what the municipal council says, based upon what the MLA for the area says, these are our priorities. That's the sort of response that we have to come from the Department of Transportation. But the concern is, it's the perception. The perception is there's politics involved. And that come election time, pavement will hit the road. That's why it's of crucial importance that we determine the criteria for road work. And so that people know whether it's the Scotts Branch Road, whether it's the McGraw's Cove Road, whether it's that infamous Porcupine Hill, up and down over Terrence Bay. People will know, well, Porcupine Hill will receive road work, the amount of road work, and the time frame for it. If it's done in an open fashion, then that is, after all, how it should be done. Now, the previous Minister of Transportation, I want to compliment him. He knew and toured roads in my community. And when he came to Porcupine Hill, the next day in the House when he responded to the questions that I asked, he inadvertently called me the MLA from Porcupine Hill. But he went there and he looked at the problem. Now, we all know that we have roads in our communities that need work. However, there is no way, and I know it's not a prop, but we cannot get into this divide and conquer, which I have here from the Liverpool Advance. NDP stance is anti-rural, says Morash. Now that's the sort of comment that pits one community against another community. Many of the people in Liverpool called me and said, "What are you saying?" I am saying that 100 series money for paving, 100 series money for improvements to those roads has to go to 100 series projects. Yet the member from Queens, and I did say, and I put it for the record, and I will table this in a moment, I did say that we cannot have 100 series money end up on a back road in Queens County. But for the member from Queens to sit during this debate, and not participate after using the old divide and conquer mentality of that government, that's the shameful sort of way. That gives us all a bad reputation as MLAs. That gives us all a bad reputation when it comes to determining transportation priorities across this province. Mr. Speaker, thank you for your time.
The honourable member for Cape Breton Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And you know, Mr. Speaker, just the beginning, I am glad to hear that the honourable member from Yarmouth is getting his black top put on his roads. And what I've witnessed here, Mr. Speaker, is exactly what is wrong with today's government. Prior to 1999, there was a program in place, infrastructure program. A new deal has been signed by this government. But the program prior to 1999 that Russell McClellan had signed with the federal government indicated very clearly that within the formula, approximately 38% of that funding would be spent in rural Nova Scotia. And that would protect, that was in there apparently to protect the rural areas from the larger centers like Halifax. But this government, Mr. Speaker, has eliminated that formula. And there's no avenue now to do rural infrastructure. And rural infrastructure could be water lines or sewer lines, or it could be bridges, Mr. Speaker. What it would do if this was a clause in this new agreement would free up money for pavement. It would free up and provide, lift the handicap that this government has imposed on itself, because they have to use other funding for the blacktops instead of putting a portion in and paying a three-way portion to do water lines and sewer lines that would comprise of construction of the highways as well. And I've had several projects throughout my community prior to 1999 completed like this, and it does have a major positive impact in the community. I know now that since the federal fisheries minister has gotten his roads fixed, hopefully the minister will point his direction and his attention to Cape Breton, where he has 2 MPs elected down there, and they are Liberal MPs, and I don't hear not a word about infrastructure, Mr. Speaker. If I look at the Cabot Trail, the road leading to and from the Cabot Trail should be a 100 series highway, which would allow the federal government to spend maintenance money on this road. And these roads, Mr. Speaker, I've been on them recently, believe me, they are not fit to drive a 5-ton truck on. So how or why tourists would even, consider going there? And I mean, Mr. Speaker, residents in northern Cape Breton, such as Meat Cove, have experienced difficulties with homes burning down because the roads weren't salted. The fire trucks couldn't get to the scene of the fire, Mr. Speaker. Now, this is a very serious situation. I could tell you probably 100 such situations that I have documented in my files. And these are very serious issues for this government to deal with. And if they're, I have streets in my constituency, really, it's a tax grab for the government. For instance, just a young lady called me just a couple of weeks ago after obtaining a new job at a local car dealership. She purchased, one of the first things she did, because she was happy to obtain the job, was to purchase a used vehicle. Well, Mr. Speaker, she didn't make too many trips up the Georges River Road before damage to the bumper was caused by a culvert that was dropped in the highway. No signs, although the Department of Highway officials did indicate that they dropped the signs, and I don't doubt that. But vandalism and youths, whatever, when I visited that site, there was no such signs located along that stretch. And Mr. Speaker, there's Village Drive, there's Church Road, there's Alder Point Road, there's Route 223, there's the Johnson Road, there's the Grosse Point Road, there's Millville Road. The list goes on and on, the Escazoli Road. My constituency has paid the price for partisan politics long enough, Mr. Speaker. When will these parties get together to put some type of formula together so that we don't have this conflicts created between the constituency of Yarmouth and former ministers? What we need in this province is a non-partial policy to deal with the worst roads first. And Mr. Speaker, that is quite easy to put forth. The stipulations could be, you know, we have people working in the Department of Transportation that really are intelligent. And they know how to deal with this situation if the politicians took it out of their control. But they want to own this, Mr. Speaker. They want to be able to go down on the street and say, look, I paved your street. You know, vote for me, I'm going to pave the next street. Mr. Speaker, that type of politics in Nova Scotia has been around forever. But it's old-time politics. It's time to get modern. If the minister and the premier are serious about delivering a progressive road policy in this province, nonpartisan road policy must be developed. My community has paid the price because it had a liberal representation in a Tory government. It paid because it had an NDP representation in a Liberal government. Mr. Speaker, it's time now. I don't think my constituency seen a new paving project since the Pointe-Coney road was paved. And that was done when I was a municipal councillor, Mr. Speaker, by the former premier of the province that I several times that I had to go to the premier, and he understood, he knew, he was aware of the street, he visited the street with me personally, and he agreed with the concerns the people had. That's the type of representation, Mr. Speaker, that we require here. Just simply to stand back and do nothing because your HST or GST revenue is increasing because of the number of tires that are being purchased by motorists, front-end parts such as ball joints, tie rod ends. Front-end shops are making an abundance of work, but revenues continue to increase, Mr. Speaker. And we see that similar to the insurance industry, where there's absolutely no effort whatsoever put forth to deal with these issues because revenue keeps coming in, Mr. Speaker, and isn't that the name of the game for this government? Mr. Speaker, anytime bumps on roads cause difficulties for bumpers on cars, then I think it's very recognizable that there's problems on our highways. Mr. Speaker, last year, there was reports in local media outlets about students on buses having split lips from hitting bumps and the children jumping up and biting, you know, their lip on their tooth. Mr. Speaker, when will we get a government in this province that is nonpartisan, that will deal with the issues that face all Nova Scotians, not just people in a riding that we're lucky enough to pick a winner? Mr. Speaker, if I look in any of these ridings, I'd have to ask, how many ridings outside of Tory control obtained paving in the past 3 years? Mr. Speaker, I would suggest that list is very minimal. Mr. Speaker, it's time to move forward. 2% increase in gas prices have enabled this government the funding necessary to fix the roads, not only in Yarmouth, not only in Richmond or in Cape Breton Nova, but in Cape Breton the Lakes, in every riding. A truly nonpartisan road policy. That's what we require, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
moment left. Everybody wants it. I'd like to thank the honourable members taking part in the debate this evening. The House will resume into a committee of the whole House on estimates at 6:30, I guess. If you're ready? I'm waiting for staff. 6:30.
Thank you. I'll call the committee to order. We have 31 minutes left in estimates this evening. We're in debate with the NDP caucus with the Minister of Education. And Minister, did you want to stand now and finish your comment? I'll give you 15 seconds to the good, Minister, and this is your day, I'm sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The reason for the lapse time between your recognition and rising is to wait for the light to come on. So I just want to explain that.
Thank
to
you.
And
The Minister of Education.
it'd be a dull place if we were depending on your lights. Mr. Chairman, I was, in response to the honourable member for Timberlea Prospects comments relative to discipline, I was commenting about the impact that the Charter of Rights had on the authority of teachers within the classrooms. Not just the authority of teachers, but the authority of many people within our society relative to others. And as a result of that, the capacity of teachers to be able to enforce discipline has been diminished considerably. I also was recounting a story about how youth that I met with in the weekend were explaining the frustration they had as a result of adults adults appearing as if they were intimidated by the youth. And I believe that I recounted as well the difference, as that discussion went on, the difference in the experience of those who lived in the rural parts of Nova Scotia, where everyone tended to know everyone else, and the relationship between the adult population and the youth was a very positive relationship. There was an appreciation of one for the other and a considerable knowledge of one and the other. So in areas where, just to refresh honourable members with the story I was relating, the youth felt that the adults were intimidated by them at a particular scene. And I was making the point that in those circumstances there was a lack of knowledge of the adults as to who the youth were and what families they came from and everything. And as a result of that, there's quite a gap in relative to understanding, and there was a sense of intimidation on the part of the adults, felt intimidated by the presence of the students, and the students were frustrated, or the youth were frustrated, I should say, by this apparent attitude on the part of the adults. And I related the story in order to illustrate the fact that culturally we have a gap, I believe, that we need to address relative to the matter of discipline. In that, it was a very interesting conversation on Saturday, because one of the suggestions that was made, for instance, is that perhaps what needs to have happen is for people to engage in dialogue. That's supposedly what we're famous for in this part of the world, where you say to somebody, "Hi, how are you today? It's a nice day," or there is some dialogue engaged and you don't really have to know the person that you're having that conversation with. Well, perhaps we should be emphasizing with our adults and with the youth that they should not be afraid to enter dialogue, to exchange pleasantries, so that that sort of thing doesn't happen. So I'm suggesting that there is a cultural bridge to be gapped here. Now, when we move the situation to the classroom, then because we're not going to be turning the clock back relative to the Charter of Rights, then the challenge is one where we need to develop respect for and mutual understanding of one another within any given environment, so that there is a level of tolerance developed, and there is a level of respect developed, so that people can learn to conduct themselves in a way that does not infringe upon the rights and the ability of others to conduct themselves in a particular manner. So when it comes to the classroom, there needs to be an understanding on the part of everyone involved that the primary objective of what's going on in the classroom is education, and that behavior that impedes that activity is behavior that is not fitting for the circumstance. And in order to achieve that, I made reference before the break that perhaps the word discipline is not the word that we need anymore, because discipline is much harder to enforce relative to previous standards that our society has had, and that the emphasis needs not to be placed on discipline, but rather on respect and mutual understanding, and that there needs to be a cultural emphasis placed on that. And all of that, Mr. Chairman, is to say that the code of conduct, which we're attempting to put forward within our schools in this province, is one which is based on mutual respect, and it is one that needs to be supported by all partners in the education process. And when that respect is lacking, then it becomes very difficult to achieve a code of conduct which is satisfactory to the educational process within our schools. So, Mr. Chairman, I want to thank the honourable member for raising that question, because he puts his finger on an area, in my view, which is a very real challenge for all of us relative to education and relative to the conduct of individuals within our schools. And it's one that all of us need to dedicate ourselves to in terms of achieving positive, constructive results. So I welcome the honourable member's intervention. I will listen carefully to any and all suggestions that he has to make with respect to this very important subject, and of course that goes with respect to all other honourable members and individuals. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for your comments. Minister, I'd like to recognize the member from Timberley Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair. For those members who are in attendance, I want to frame those comments that we began with, because we're talking about the growth industry in education, the popularity, the attractiveness of private schools, and that enrollment continues to grow in private schools, that people are making sure, in spite of the fact that they have to spend increasing amounts of money, they want their children to go to private schools. And one of the most attractive, perhaps the attractive feature that is at the top of the priority list is there is still discipline in private schools. And then in the public schools, because of some of the factors the minister brought forward, this has been neglected. Out of no fault of teachers, let's be clear on that. Teachers are frustrated, teachers are concerned, but we'll come back to the code of conduct later in the hours that we have ahead of us. Instead, during the time this evening, I would like to look at the role of our school boards with the Department of Education. And in particular, I would like to address, if I could please, through you, Mr. Chair, comments that come out of the Auditor General's report. And hopefully I won't have to table my Reader's Digest copy of the Auditor General, as long as I don't use it as a prop. I know you'll allow me to continue to use it. But the Reader's Digest edition of the Auditor General's report points out a number of major findings, and I'm going to ask the Minister to comment upon these, particularly because of, in the view of a lot of Nova Scotians, the lack of accountability of school boards. In particular, the Auditor General has brought to the attention of members present who are part of the public the committee, of course, which we, Public Accounts Committee, which we have each Wednesday morning here from 8 to 10 in this House, of which I have the privilege of being the chair. The Auditor General has brought forward some comments, particularly with regards to major findings that he and his staff are concerned about. And I would like the Minister to comment upon some of them, if he could, please. The Auditor General in his report says that the current funding system does not motivate regional school boards to invest in preventative maintenance, deferred costs. The fact, of course, is that we know many of our schools in areas throughout this province are falling to pieces. And what the Auditor General has said, that the current funding system doesn't motivate in any way for regional school boards to invest in this important budgetary item. And I would ask the Minister to comment on that particular finding of the Auditor General.
Thank you. The Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the honourable member for bringing this matter before the committee. He again is talking about a subject that is very important to the department, because we have obviously the responsibility for those buildings. I recall in my final years of teaching, when there were the budget crunches that I referenced earlier, and the school boards making decisions in favor of programs at the expense of buildings and at the expense of maintenance in buildings. And the cumulative effect of that over years is presenting itself today in very real terms. And it is necessary for us to address that. We have, in fact, this year an expenditure of $18 million for additions and alterations to schools, which is part of that. We have a $3 million item which we make available to school boards to address this concern. And the Auditor General, I believe, has also put his finger on a situation where there is a bit of a disconnect relative to the responsibility of school boards in dealing with the maintenance of these buildings, and our responsibility as being the owner of the buildings and the financier of the buildings. And that is something that we're working with our partners, the school boards, to address. And we have a committee made up of people from the school boards, people from the department, and we're looking at the specific recommendations of the Auditor General in order to ensure that number one, that those recommendations are addressed, but number two, that we put in place a mechanism that will ensure that proper allocation of funds relative to the relative to the maintenance of buildings will be in place and will withstand any changes in spending over time, so that we do in fact adequately address the maintenance issues of our schools. So, Mr. Chairman, it is something that is very important to us, and we're working with the school boards, and we're going to continue to meet with them and to put in place, as I said, a program of maintenance that will ensure that the concerns addressed by the Auditor General, concerns which we share, and the concerns articulated by the Honourable Member, in fact are addressed over time, and that we do not get ourselves into such a situation in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. I recognize the member from Timberley Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to continue with the Auditor General's comments. And I know we can say that we're trying to do things. However, it concerns me that if we particularly look at this finding, which is included in the audit of objectives, the audit of communication between the department and the regional school boards, it says regional school boards provide audited financial statements, but the department does not analyze property service expenditures in detail. The concern comes down that if we are saying that the regional school boards, they have a responsibility, no doubt, but in return, the department does not analyze property services expenditures in detail. Regional school boards do not regularly report important information to the department, it also goes on to say. Building conditions, service levels, deferred maintenance. The department does not have a process to adequately monitor regional school boards' performance in maintaining schools. So eventually, as the minister knows, the buck stops on your desk. And the accountability of school boards across this province on this important topic eventually ends up in your office. What sort of steps are you prepared to take that this is not going to continue?
Thank you for the question, and I'll direct that to the Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The report that the Honourable Member references, and which is referenced by the Auditor General, those reports do not provide the level of detail that is required to do the sort of analysis that is required relative to maintenance. We do, however, work with the school boards beyond the documentation that's provided, and we do have an extremely good knowledge of our buildings and our schools, and we are working to, and indeed putting up the money to address these shortcomings. And we will continue to carry on that level of detailed consultation with our partners in the school boards in order to address these things. We meet, for instance, we meet with the maintenance staff of the schools on a monthly basis, so that it is an ongoing consultation that takes place between ourselves and the school boards. We will continue to address this, and indeed, Mr. Chairman, if we will be coming forward with further initiatives with respect to this in the future, because we're actively involved in consideration of actions that we can take to enhance the level of maintenance that goes on within our schools. But I did want to make the point with the Honourable Member that beyond the documentation that is referenced by the Auditor General, there is a level of communication that occurs between the staff of the Department of Education and the school boards. I referenced, for instance, the monthly meetings with the maintenance people on the school boards, that level of interaction is continuously ongoing.
Thank you, Minister. Recognize the member from Timberley Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Minister, I want to turn to specifics of the Auditor General's report and his staff's recommendation with regards to the Halifax Regional School Board specifically. In fact, with some surprise, this biggest school board that we have, we were informed through the committee of which I am the chair, that the project management systems, Megamation, it's called, Megamation software, which is used by other boards to track the importance of maintenance, to look at property services, that the one school board that is not using Megamation is the Halifax Regional School Board, the biggest, the one that has the most buildings, the one that has the biggest budget, the one that has the most number of expenditures probably when it comes to such issues as they're taking care of with school maintenance. Mr. Minister, what are you prepared to do to ensure that a proven piece of software should be used, if it's already used, compliments to the Halifax Regional School Board, but the Auditor General in his report and in the comments that he made in front of our committee last week pointed out that the Halifax Regional School Board is not using Megamation. Can you, in your auspices as the Minister of Education, ensure that this proven piece of software would be used by the Halifax Regional School Board at the earliest date?
Thank you for the question, and direct that to the Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I can inform the honourable member that the Halifax Regional School Board, I'm informed that the Halifax Regional School Board is in fact employing two consultants who are presently addressing the issue to which the honourable member refers. And it is their mandate to come forward with suggestions, and certainly we look forward to hearing what those suggestions are and what follow-up activity will be pursued by the school board.
Thank you, Minister. The member from Timberley Prospect.
And one of the final recommendations the Auditor General makes with regards to the Halifax Regional School Board, and he says and his staff says in the comments that the Halifax Regional School Board review existing controls over maintenance materials, inventory, and implement changes. My question to the Minister is, will the Halifax Regional School Board report what they have done in light of what the Auditor General has recommended to you as the Minister who is responsible ultimately for this sort of issue?
Thank you for the question. Recognize the Minister of Education.
I want to thank the honourable member. I can tell the honourable member that the committee which I referenced earlier that exists as part of the response to the Auditor General, that is a committee of department personnel and personnel from the school boards, includes representation from the Halifax board, and we fully anticipate that they will be obviously part of the formulating the response, and we would fully expect that they would sign on to that response and implement the recommended actions to address the concerns identified by the Auditor General.
The member from Timberley Prospect.
Thank you, and I'd like to move on from that topic. As the Minister is aware, we have a number of topics to discuss during the limited time which we have during estimates. At this stage, I would like to move to a topic that's of concern to many Nova Scotians, and in particular, of course, to myself in a previous career as a school administrator, and that is African Heritage Month. African Heritage Month is of consequence in schools throughout this province, that there have been concerns, however, that appropriate funding is no longer in place to make sure that this particular event receives the profile which it should from one board to the other. I was wondering if the minister shares those concerns that have been expressed to me by a member of the community that I'm fortunate enough to represent about ongoing funding concerns with regards to African Heritage Month.
Thank you for the question. I'll direct that to the Minister of Education. The Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to indicate to the honourable member that we indeed provide funding to address concerns relative to issues surrounding the community, and I can say that the particular issue that the honourable member references is not one that has been brought to my attention up to this time. I will, however, explore the issue, and and depending upon what is brought forward, we'll respond hopefully in an appropriate manner. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. I recognize the member from Timberley Prospect.
I have learned from experience earlier during estimates that if I bring forth a particular piece of documentation, I have to table it. I see it there in front of me, and I'm reluctant to do that. However, I know I can't use this prop, but I have in my possession a book entitled Drawing the Line, a resource for the prevention of problem gambling, that was made available in a pilot projects in certain schools around the province for grades 4 to 6. It's a curriculum supplement for health and math. It was published by the Department of Health, the Gaming Services and Drug Dependency, and the Department of Education. And if I hold it up, then I can't use it anymore. Mr. Minister, are you aware of this particular pilot project? What was the reception in the schools in which it was used? And is it really the sort of thing that the public school students in grades 4 to 6 should be looking at? And if any of the members would like to look at this book, it is, in my opinion, a controversial workbook to say the least. Grades 4 to 6, Drawing the Line, a resource for the prevention of problem gambling. What is the status of the pilot project? What are the results? And heaven forbid if we're going to extend this pilot project to other schools, in my opinion.
Thank you. I'd like to recognize the Minister of Education with 4 minutes left.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And this particular issue is among those categories of issues that the school system is sometimes asked to address. And I believe as a society, it's necessary for us to very seriously question the capacity of our school system to address the myriad of concerns and issues that exist within our society. Our education system obviously should be providing skills for individuals to allow them to live a productive life, expose them to the elements of our society, the accomplishments of our society that would enable them to live a fulfilling life. But very often we get sidetracked because there are so many issues out there that schools are being asked to address. And the capacity of our teachers to be able to adequately address these concerns is something that, that I believe we need to take a very serious look at. And we need to decide what it is what is the responsibility of our schools and what is the responsibility of other agencies and other resources that exist within the community. Having said all of that, Mr. Chairman, I can indicate to the honourable member that if that was a pilot, then there should be an analysis of the pilot available within the department. I will seek that and provide the results of it to the honourable member.
Thank you, Minister. I would like to recognize the member from Timberley Prospect with a minute and 40 seconds.
Thank you. I want members in the House to know of this book, and I think it's important that I share with the members present where this project, these pilot projects were used. So if you happen to have a school in this area, the Brookfield Memorial School, a pilot project on gambling. The English Street School, the Cox Heath Elementary School, the Upper Stewiacke Elementary School, as I come down through, Somerset and District Elementary School, Mulgrave Memorial Education Center, and the Hebville Academy. Now, this particular pilot project, excuse my humble opinion, is a waste of time and a waste of money, because this sort of pilot project, in my view, and I am no expert on curriculum innovations, let me tell you, has no place in the school system. As far as I'm concerned, the teachers of grades 4, 5, and 6 in those schools have a full enough plate with the many, many expectations that we all know of. Yet, a pilot project is allowed to move into these schools.
Order, please. Order. Time has expired for the estimates for this evening, and I would like to recognize the government House Leader.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I move the committee to now rise, report considerable progress, and beg leave to sit again on a future day.
Thank you.
Chairman, on the Committee on the whole House on Supply reports.
The committee has met and made considerable progress and begs leave to sit again.
So agreed? The Honourable Government House Leader.
Speaker, would you please call public bills for second reading?
Public bills for second reading.
Mr. Speaker, would you please call Bill number 3, the Personal Property Security Act?
Bill number 3, the Personal Property Security Act. The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm pleased to have the chance tonight to move for second reading Bill number 3, the Personal Property Securities Act. Mr. Speaker, this bill is just going to lay the groundwork from some significant consumer protection measures in the future. This would clarify that consumers could search for personal property registry by serial number or by name. This is a proactive measure, Mr. Speaker, and it's a response to courts' decisions in Nova Scotia and other Canadian jurisdictions. This bill, when passed, would enable the province to establish an internet-based lien check where consumers could search public records by serial number to determine if the car, boat, or some other high-end good product need to be purchased has any outstanding liens. Mr. Speaker, this bill will clarify that the Personal Securities Act applies to offshore registered items in the personal property insurance. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to move second reading.
The Honourable Member for Halifax, Shabakto.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I was interested to hear what it was that the minister would say in explanation of what his bill was about. I do have some comments to make about it, but let me just immediately cut to the chase and be clear that our party will be supporting this bill. We regard it as a useful small piece of legislation dealing with this question of liens on chattels. But I'd like to start by expressing some thanks to the minister because of the way in which he has chosen to approach this bill. He did this by having his officials invite the critics who are responsible for Service Nova Scotia to meet with them for an explanation of what it is that this bill was all about. I have to say that when we're dealing with technical legislation, that this is a very good idea. It was very welcome. I know that I found it useful to receive the briefing that we were given by the departmental solicitor and by the other official who was in charge of the registry. It was a useful clarification of how it is that this system is designed to work. Partly because my training is in the law, we had a discussion about the cases both in Nova Scotia and in other jurisdictions, PEI, for example, that had led to some dispute about who was responsible when certain errors are made in computerized searching. One of the things I don't think the minister actually did mention is that it's, I think, the intention of his officials to set up a common system among the Atlantic provinces, so that the 4 Atlantic provinces, so that anyone searching would be able to search for liens in the 4 Atlantic provinces using the same inputs and the same computer system. This is a very useful initiative. I think it's exactly the kind of things that computers are going to be able to do for us more frequently in the future. It's exactly the kind of modernization of a lien searching system that ought to take place, and I think it's right that the minister's department has taken steps to engage in not only establishing an Atlantic provinces system, but in improving it. There's often a process of dialogue that goes on between the legislature and the courts. We pass laws that we hope have clarity. Occasionally questions arise and they're litigated, and the courts tell us whether in their opinions there's actually clarity or there isn't. And if we're told that there isn't clarity, it's up to us to further respond to try to make clear the point that was actually intended by us collectively in the first place. That's exactly what's happened here, is that on similarly worded legislation, that is legislation similar to the wording that we had prior to these amendments, there were some disputes as to what occurs in the interesting circumstances in which someone who is doing a search for liens against property perhaps inadvertently enters the wrong serial number or the wrong name. Furthermore, there's a complicating factor of what happens when those who are registering the liens in the first place put in the wrong serial number or the wrong name. And as one can well imagine, they might make an error of 1 digit in a long serial number, and yet it wouldn't be the correct serial number. Or they might type an A when they meant to hit a C. It's easy enough to make these small errors, and the problem is, does the lien become ineffective against someone who takes who purchased the chattel and does a search afterwards? This is an interesting and problematic area. I only hope that the language of this bill is sufficient to cover off these circumstances. I know we're not in clause by clause, but I have to say that there's at least some wording in the bill that does cause me at least mild concern. But I'm not sure that can be fixed, in the sense that I don't know if it's possible to clarify so completely the language around these circumstances that there'll never be room for dispute. I think this bill goes some way towards it. I think that a very commendable effort has been made to deal here with a routine administrative function of government, but one which has serious implications for many people out there. I mean, many people will want to purchase, as the minister said, cars or boats, or, as he said as well, high-end chattels that may well have liens against them by the original lending institutions. And people will want to be assured that those liens are either present or not present. And if they're present, they want to make sure they're paid off. This is a commonly encountered set of circumstances. So I commend the minister, and as I said, we will be supporting this bill. I think it's a very useful way to engage with the computerization of our society. This is exactly the kind of niche where computers can be used, but as we learned in the disputes over liability, in computer user language, GIGO, Mr. Speaker, that means garbage in, garbage out. In other words, it's always possible to make mistakes, and anyone inputting can easily make an error, and we have to figure out where the liability lies after that. So I thank the minister for asking his officials to brief the opposition critics. It's very useful, and this is a useful bill. So with those remarks, I repeat again, we will be supporting this bill at second reading. Thank you very much.
The honourable member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise on behalf of our caucus to say a few words on Bill number 3, an act to amend Chapter 13 of the Acts of 1995-96, the Personal Property Securities Act. Mr. Speaker, I understand the intent of this piece of legislation is to correct a legal misinterpretation. Mr. Speaker, in reviewing this legislation, there would appear that this legislation reflects a desire to clarify the wording of the present Personal Property Securities Act. It addresses and clarifies what the understanding of misleading, defect, irregularity, omission, or error is when registering personal property. Mr. Speaker, it appears that these changes are clarified wording and to update this relatively recent piece of legislation. There has been some discussion on the interpretation of the wording, as I've said. The case law in the East, as I understand, but has not yet, Nova Scotia hasn't really been affected, I guess, or challenged on this issue, that a searcher must search by both name and serial number. Understand in the West, however, the case suggests that a searcher need only to search by either name or serial number. Mr. Speaker, this amendment to the legislation will ensure the uniform of interpretation on how search provisions under the property registry are viewed. As I understand it from my discussions with those working on these amendments, this is the original intent of the legislation. Indeed, the proposed changes to the Personal Property Security Act reflect the necessity of correcting the problem out of the courts of New Brunswick and Prince Edward Island and the Western provinces. I guess, Mr. Speaker, we aren't the only province in the East that will be correcting this problem. I understand the 3 other provinces will also move this year to address this interpretation issue to ensure that all acts are continued to remain the same in wording and understanding. This legislation will have the effect of bringing those interpretations back into line. It would appear reasonable that the interpretation of the legislation would also be consistent. Mr. Speaker, this legislation, which we have little problem in supporting, will help to address this. Mr. Speaker, we know that main purpose of these changes, and as I said earlier, the case law with respect to serial number searches in New Brunswick and Prince Edward Island have been interpreted differently from the Western provinces. And in discussions with those trying to address this legislation, it would appear that many within the legal community agree that the interpretation given by the courts appear contrary to the intent of the legislation. The Atlantic provinces are all making changes to their respective legislation to correct the error in order to create a uniform law that reflects what the rest of Canada and the initial intent of the legislation. Mr. Speaker, as I understand from the case law, it would seem to suggest that a searcher must search by both the name and the serial number. The legislation contains, and I quote, an "or" statement, but has been interpreted to be read as an "and" statement. The amendments will make it clear that a serial number search will be sufficient for serial numbered items. For example, given that many used automobiles are bought and sold frequently, it makes sense that using the serial number as the main search, since it and not the name of the owner stays with the vehicle. The amendments, however, will make it clear that if a proper serial number search is sufficient for serial numbered goods. Mr. Speaker, the amendments will make it clear that if a proper serial number search does not return a result, there is an invalid serial number registration. This will protect the searchers and those looking to determine whether there is any liens or other vested interests in line for this property. I guess, Mr. Speaker, in closing, our caucus will be supporting these amendments to the Personal Property Securities Act, and we look forward to have this bill brought to law amendments. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I recognize the Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia, to close debate on Bill number 3.
Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable members for their comments. We've made some notes of those comments, and we certainly will be developing those comments as we move on to the Law Amendments Committee. This, as has been indicated, is to enable people to do an easier search and to deal with a court case. Well, that said, Mr. Speaker, I move second reading.
Motion is for second reading of Bill number 3. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favor say aye. Turn to mind at nay. Motion is carried.
Bill number 3, an act to amend Chapter 13 of the Acts of 1995-96, the Personal Property Security Act.
This bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Would you please call Bill number 9, the Municipal Law Amendments 2000 Act?
Bill number 9. The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm pleased to move for second reading Bill number 9, the Municipal Law Amendments Act. Mr. Speaker, this is this bill amends 3 different pieces of legislation: the Municipal Government Act, the Municipal Grants Act, and the Municipal Elections Act. And every year, the municipal governments ask us to make some amendments to the Municipal Government Act, and that's what we're doing at the request of individual municipalities and indeed the Union of Nova Scotia Municipalities. Mr. Speaker, Section 22 deals with the amendment that we was asked for by the Halifax Region Municipality and the Union, which has to do with councillors and officials of the municipality that should release information that causes the municipality to become liable and indeed lose them some money. The intent of this is to protect the taxpayers so that confidential information isn't used for somebody's gain. There are other sections in this, Mr. Speaker, that enable municipalities to sell odd-shaped or small lots to owners of abutting properties. Other amendments which deal with request of municipalities and for general housekeeping. Under the Municipal Grants Act, we're making some amendments to formalize the long-standing practice of the province paying grants in lieu of business occupancy tax to provincial-owned properties. Under the Elections Act, we're making a few amendments which would enable and help in campaigning in apartment buildings and clarify the cost recoveries by municipalities for running school boards elections. These changes, Mr. Speaker, are changes that have been requested by the municipalities, and I'm pleased to move second reading.
The Honourable Member for Halifax, Shabakto.
Mr. Speaker, I intend to take a little more time dealing with Bill 9 than I took dealing with Bill number 3. And I can't start off by pledging that our caucus is favorably disposed to this bill. Indeed, as I'll try to explain, in this long omnibus bill, there are many problematic provisions. I can agree with the minister that indeed there are parts of it that could be characterized as housekeeping, but I cannot agree that the whole of the bill can be characterized as housekeeping or as sensible legislation. I have to say that at the very least, there are serious questions that have to be raised about a number of the provisions in Bill 9, and I am seriously worried about a few of those. So I want to try to explain what it is that has caught my eye as I read through this bill. I should explain, Mr. Speaker, that this is not merely a casual interest for myself. There are a number of us, of course, in this chamber who are former members of municipal councils. So, of course, I share with those members a strong interest in how it is that municipalities are given a framework for their governance by the province. That's our duty. That's what we do. We try not to get involved in detailed land use planning decisions that are merely local. That's in our determination to be left for elected local governments. We set the framework for that. Now, I take a special interest as a former municipal councillor, and I would think that many of the members of this House, including the Honourable Minister, would take a strong interest as well because of their backgrounds in this and their detailed knowledge. I add an extra layer in this particular topic because I happen to teach this subject. At Dalhousie Law School, there is a course called Land Use Planning Law. I teach that course. It's essentially municipal law, although regulation of land use is also federal and also done through private instruments between private individuals or private corporations. But the main thrust of it is to look at municipal regulation of land uses. And I've spent probably, I think now 6 years teaching this course annually. In fact, I spent this whole weekend reading my students' papers, an interesting exercise for any teacher to read their students' papers at the end of term. But one of the things we look at, of course, is the Municipal Government Act, which is the main piece of legislation that governs municipalities and probably the main statute that is being amended here. And partly as a teacher, partly also as a practitioner in this area. Certainly in the past, I've litigated land use planning matters aplenty. As recently as a year ago, I, on a volunteer basis, took a case to the Utility and Review Board. That was a land use planning case. I tried to keep current with the law as it has developed in Nova Scotia and as it moves around Canada and in the United States and the United Kingdom, so that I can teach my students and also write articles, which I also do on this subject. So I was not entirely taken with a number of the provisions in the bill. And since I haven't specifically been consulted about this the way we were about Bill 3 or invited in by staff for a consultation, I believe this will be the first opportunity I've had to let the minister know some of the points that struck me as matters of concern.
Order, please. Now, member for Halifax-Shubakdale.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I have identified perhaps, I think, 7 items that have struck me as potentially problematic. And before I launch into a discussion of these, I should say to the minister that they're all, with respect to Part 2 of his bill, they don't really have to do with the elections process. It seems to me that those sections are just fine and that the problems don't arise there. The problems do arise, I think, with respect to the proposed amendments to the Municipal Government Act. Not all of them by any means, but there are a number that struck me. And I'm afraid I'd rather have to treat them one by one, in the sense that although we're making general comments about the purpose of the bill, this is, of course, an omnibus bill, so we have to address ourselves to the different aspects of them as they come to the fore. Because we're not in clause by clause, I won't list the individual clauses, nor will I discuss in any detail the wording, because the issue here is not really the wording. The issue is really more the thought behind the individual proposals that come forward. So let me just tell the Minister the first one that struck me as potentially problematic. And it was the proposal to add landscaping to the list of items that can be dealt with by a municipality as unsightly premises. Now, I have a problem with this in two respects. First, I have a lot of hesitation over whether landscaping ought to be dealt with as a matter of unsightly premises at all. But more importantly, and I think the Minister should really ask his officials for some advice about this, there is a real question about whether landscaping can be regulated as a matter of unsightly premises in the abstract. That is, the problem that has been encountered by municipalities that have attempted to do this is that litigation has shown that regulatory bylaws can be successfully attacked as vague, as void for vagueness, unless they are specifically tied to objective criteria. Aesthetics, what appeals to one person, what an inspector might think is appropriate, even what the neighbors might think is appropriate, is not supportable when it comes to a bylaw that attempts to deal with landscaping as a matter of unsightly premises. The leading case is a 1996 decision known as Toronto versus Bell. In this case, Ms. Bell was a proponent of what she called natural landscaping. She made sure that she grew on her lawn a variety of plants, grasses, small bushes, shrubs that were native to Canada, native to Ontario, but that grew in profusion and that were certainly not just a lawn made up of plain grass kept cut to a couple of inches in height. What she had was what she regarded as an organic entity, as an ecological whole, something that expressed her understanding of what was appropriate, and she defended the charge that was ultimately brought against her of under the Toronto bylaw of maintaining unsightly premises because of what her lawn looks like, on the basis that the bylaw was too vague, and furthermore, that it was an infringement of her right to self-expression. Now, in the end, she was successful in defending herself from the charge. In other words, she was acquitted. In other words, the bylaw was found to be ineffective, and it was found to be ineffective on constitutional grounds as a violation of the Charter of Rights. So I have to say that I'm surprised to find this kind of provision coming forward, apparently with no consideration given to this jurisprudence, which I think is fairly well-known jurisprudence. It's a well-known case, certainly well-known to those of us who practice or teach in the area of municipal law, and I would have thought well-known to the minister's advisors. Essentially what I'm saying is that if the minister is interested in giving municipalities the power to regulate landscape, then the power should be a slightly different power. The power should be expressed so that the bylaws have to be very particular and with objective criteria to be met. But I would ask the minister to reconsider this regardless of whether he is able to frame it in a way that appeals to objective criteria. And the problem is this. The problem is that there is a very large group of people throughout North America who have advocated for what they call natural landscaping. In fact, a few years ago, one of my students did his graduate thesis on natural landscaping. I was interested, and I have to say, perhaps a little surprised to find the extent to which there are individuals, supported by their communities often, who have moved away from what many of us grew up thinking was a traditional form of front lawn. In fact, of course, I know my own front lawn doesn't look like that anymore. I've dug it up and I put garden in. And I think as we look around, we find that many people are doing similar things. I certainly know that there is a taste for gardening that's very widespread. There's nothing that requires all of us, nor should there be anything that requires all of us, to subscribe to the regularity of uniform green grass front lawns. I'm all in favor of green space, but I'm also in favor of variety. And there are reasons for it, and they're not purely aesthetic. It's not just a question of thinking that flowers and shrubs might be prettier than uniform green lawns. This is not a matter aesthetics on which I'm attempting to impose my views on anyone, just as I don't think anyone else should impose their views on me or those who might be interested in natural landscaping. What I am saying is that the minister should consider the possibility of encouraging natural landscaping.
Order, please.
Oh.
No member for Halifax Shabakto.
Thank you again, Mr. Speaker. I was inviting the minister to consider ways in which he might frame the powers of municipalities to allow them to encourage natural landscaping, to think about variety in lawns, to encourage individuals to express themselves and to create small ecological interactive areas on their property in ways that don't amount to safety problems or hazards. And there, I have to say, of course, there are legitimate reasons why, in some circumstances, there might be height limitations. It might be a question of, or there might be limitations on the species. For example, things that are regarded as noxious weeds ought to be controlled in some form, but as I understand it, there are already controls over noxious weeds. It may be that needs clarification. If height is a problem, it won't be a problem in all areas. For example, there may be some lots that are so situated that if lawns were to grow with bushes or shrubs or trees too high, then it might be that sight lines for traffic might be interfered with. In general, I don't think that's the case, but it might be that occasionally there are properties in that circumstance, and the special allowance might be made for that. What I'm encouraging the minister to do is think about ways in which all the interests might be accommodated. And I have to say that this question of how landscaping is being tucked into the general area of unsightly premises doesn't seem to do it, because the assumption seems to be that landscaping should be regarded as potentially unsightly. I have to say that the subject seems to require a bit more detail for a proper rendering of what it is that's appropriate here for the subject. I'd like to move to the second of the list of 7 points that struck me about this bill as problematic. And this is the introduction of the possibility of a civil suit that is liability and damages for people who act as whistleblowers with respect to in-camera council meetings. The minister will know that this particular provision has already been questioned. Members of our caucus immediately flagged it when Bill 9 was introduced. They flagged this particular provision as being something that might have a chilling effect, an inappropriate chilling effect on councillors and employees of the municipality. In order to understand a little more what it is that actually goes on, I would like to put on the record what my experience was at HRM particularly, and a little bit before that on the council of the City of Halifax before it was amalgamated. The minister will know, of course, that when in this House in 1998 we brought in and debated the Municipal Government Act, there were then included a list of specific circumstances, limited circumstances, in which it was regarded as appropriate for a municipal council to meet in camera. And I have no problem with that. I think that there are clearly occasions on which a municipal council, which normally would have to carry on all of its business in public, should be able to meet in private. And the list is a fairly limited one, however. It's when council is receiving legal advice. It's when a private personnel matter is being dealt with. It's when perhaps a commercial transaction, especially a land transaction, is being considered. And there may be one or two other small things I think that are on the list. I don't have the section in front of me. But it's that kind of fundamentally private matter which treats of the municipality when it's primarily engaged in its corporate dimension, and much less engaged in its public policy dimension. But here's the problem, Mr. Speaker. Many councillors, and indeed many senior staff, regard in-camera meetings at the municipal level as the opportunity to do something more. They regard it as the opportunity to stray beyond what are the narrow confines of what ought to be limited to in-camera discussion, because they forget or deliberately ignore the fact that they are enjoined in the Municipal Government Act to meet only in public, except for those few exceptions. I can recall a number of occasions on which councillors at HRM said that they would rather discuss something in camera, and then indeed they proceeded to do so, because they felt they could fully express their true opinions much better in camera. And when they said this, they were very clear that what they were discussing went well beyond the permitted list of topics that the Municipal Government Act allows. They were clear that really what they wanted to do was discuss the regular, normally public business of council on land use, planning, or other associated matters in private, because they would rather thrash it through that way. I've even heard councillors say, not just that they could be franker in their opinions in private, but that they didn't want to make a fool of themselves by speaking out in public. Well, it seems to me that on this latter point, of course, there are other ways of approaching it. Either if you're going to make a fool of yourself, then you do it and you take your lumps. Another possibility is that you can do your homework and be ready and not make a fool of yourself. It may be that they were just a little shy or uncertain. But for the most part, that's not what I saw. For the most part, what I observed was councillors who all too frequently turned to the in-camera meeting as the normal place to do sensitive business. By sensitive, I mean business having an element of public controversy. And because this happens so frequently, it seems clear that something inappropriate was going on, and some councillors, to their credit at HRM, absolutely refused to attend any in-camera meetings. I don't know that was helpful, because occasionally there were very legitimate reasons for holding in-camera meetings. But there was clearly a split around the council table. And from what I know from talking to councillors elsewhere in the province, my experience at HRM is not untypical. My experience at HRM is indeed reflected in litigation one sees by reading cases around the country. Indeed, from time to time, citizens who learn about inappropriate in-camera meetings do bring lawsuits against their municipality, essentially inviting the courts to enjoin the councillors from engaging in this kind of activity. So we know that this is not a problem limited to HRM or to Nova Scotia. It's a Canada-wide problem, and it's probably a universal problem. I'm just a little concerned that there's something about this initiative that tends to encourage or provide a context for in-camera meetings that is inappropriate. Now I haven't heard the minister address this particular clause. I might have missed it, or perhaps he's made comments on this. But I certainly didn't hear him today talk about this aspect of the bill. He gave a fairly quick overview of what it is that the bill contains. And what I didn't hear him say is that this clause, this part of the bill, would only apply to legitimate in-camera business. Now, surely that has to be a starting point. Surely this provision cannot be meant to apply to anything that councillors or staff with their councillors deal with in camera, but do so really without the sanction of the rest of the Act. But that seems to me to be exactly the kind of thing that should be clarified in the bill, in the language, and I would hope would be clarified by comments from the minister. The minister will know that occasionally when courts are called upon to interpret portions of legislation, they will look at the comments that are made in the legislature by the minister at the time he introduces or when he debates the bill, as an aid to understanding what was intended. So I'm hoping that the minister will go on record at the very least as saying that it's his intention that if he does want to go ahead with this portion of the bill, it's only to apply with respect to matters that are purely, legitimately sanctioned elsewhere in the Municipal Government Act as bona fide exercises of the power to meet in camera. I think I see the minister nodding, and it's a little hard to see over your table, Mr. Speaker, but I think I see the minister nodding, so I'll take it that I have some hope that in due course we will hear comments to that effect from the minister. I'm encouraged to hear that. That doesn't finish my concerns about this particular provision in the bill, because even if it's limited in that way to bona fide exercises of the in-camera meeting power, there's still the question of whether it's an excessive tool to deal with the problem. And I was trying to understand what circumstances might actually come up. I was trying to think of circumstances in which there could somehow be a financial loss to the municipality as a result of this. That perhaps wouldn't otherwise be covered by the common law, because surely if there's behavior that causes loss, this is what tort law, the common law, is all about. Where someone has a duty to someone else and the duty is breached and there's a consequent injury that's quantifiable, presumably a lawsuit can follow. I'm concerned, though, about whether we're creating a liability where none existed at common law, or whether we're expanding the ambit of it, and this is unclear. So I don't want to really say any more, except that I'm on this part of it, except that I'm concerned that there's a potential chilling effect on councillors and staff. There are circumstances in which, even if there were a bona fide in-camera session, if something really problematic were to take place, some kind of whistleblowing might be appropriate. Now, I know that there's been a lot of resistance on the part of incumbent governments to consider the position of whistleblowers, but this is something that does require careful thought, and any bills we've introduced on this subject I don't think have proceeded very far, but there is some legitimate notice, some legitimate purpose in that. Let me move off of that second point and move now to a third point. And it has to do with what I think is quite a useful initiative in the bill, which I think doesn't go far enough. And here's the problem. There are a couple of different points in Part 2 where the minister is seeking to make provision with respect to the giving of notice to adjacent landowners when a municipality is considering certain uses for an adjoining or nearby piece of land. Now, as you can well understand, Mr. Speaker, that any of us who own land would be concerned to know if a development proposal is coming forward on a neighbor's piece of property. Because, of course, it's likely to affect our enjoyment of life and perhaps even our own economic interests, in the sense that the value of our own land may be affected positively or negatively. And the question of notice to adjoining landowners or to landowners in the vicinity is a question of fundamental fairness to everyone. It's a question of the opportunity to be heard, because if an owner doesn't know that something is coming up before the municipal council, then of course they don't get the opportunity to make representations, to let the council know what they think about the development proposal. So I'm all in favor of any initiatives that allow councils to give notice, or even require councils to give notice. Now, the format of that notice is a tricky point. Often we'll turn to the newspapers, and particularly in HRM, I know that on Saturday it's the habit of HRM to purchase half a page or a quarter page of space in the paper, and to notify citizens of developments in their area. And if one looks at them, sometimes these notices are of a sufficient size and contain sufficient information to let everyone know what's going on. But of course, there are a number of built-in assumptions there. One assumption is that people can read, or that they read the newspaper. And not everyone, of course, is able to read the newspaper or read anything else. There is a community out there that doesn't have the literacy skills. Or if they do have the literacy skills, simply don't read the newspapers. They may not be able to afford the newspapers. There are people in that position. And I have run into cases where people indeed didn't know. Now, in order to deal with, at least in part, some of those circumstances, municipalities like HRM have supplemented the requirements of the statute by adopting a voluntary policy of notification within a set distance around a property where some development is proposed. And here's how they do it. They do it by mailing a notice to the registered landowners. And of course, the municipality would know the registered landowners because of the assessment rolls, because of the tax rolls. And this is easy for them to do. And they do it. Now, it's not always an adequate area, and one could dispute this. Indeed, I would ask the minister to perhaps think about whether he might want to specify this kind of additional notification to go. This whole issue of notification is beset by problems. But you know what? That isn't even my main point. My main point about what's missing from the minister's provisions with respect to notice is that he speaks only about notice to owners. Now, notice to owners, of course, is easy to accomplish, and it's fairly routine for a municipality to do this. But the minister, I'm sure, will know that not all Canadians are owners. Many Canadians are tenants. I forget the exact number in recent statistics, but I think it's about 38% of Canadians, Minister is telling me perhaps 40%, of Canadians who aren't landowners but who live in apartments. And I suppose, I'm not sure how condominiums are taxed for municipal purposes, but certainly there are a substantial number of Canadians who would not be notified. Now, this sometimes means virtually all of the residents in the immediate area of a development proposal. I mentioned a little while ago that as recently as a year ago, I had acted in a volunteer capacity on behalf of a group of residents who were appealing to the Utility and Review Board a rezoning, a change in height precinct. And in that case, which had to do with property on South Street in Halifax, all of the surrounding properties within the immediate area were apartment buildings. Fenwick Towers was one of those buildings, the Joe Howe Manor was another, and there was a small apartment building just down the street. All of the truly affected residents in the immediate area were tenants. Now, it's true that HRM sent out notification to the owners of those properties. So when it comes to Fenwick Towers, which is a 33-story building, they would have sent a notice to Dalhousie University. But that's one notice compared with all the many people who lived in Fenwick Towers. Or when it came to Joe Howe Manor, they would have sent a notice to the province of Nova Scotia, which is ultimately the owner of that building, through the Housing Authority. One notice for a 10-story building with 140 apartments in it. None of those tenants would have received notice from the landlord. And although, of course, the owner of the property would have a perfectly legitimate reason to be notified and would have a perfectly legitimate interest in knowing about the new development proposal, so too would the tenants. And yet there's nothing in our laws that requires tenants to be treated equally with landowners. And indeed, if one looks at, say, something like the Human Rights Code, the Human Rights Code doesn't require us, as I see it, to read into the Municipal Government Act a requirement that tenants be treated like owners. It might be different with the Charter, but that's an outstanding point. I'm not going to explore the Charter issue here for the Minister. I'm appealing to him to think about this issue as one of fairness in light of the fact that 40% of Canadians live in apartments. And I'm suggesting that it's really only fair that something be done to make sure that when notice is given about some kind of development proposal to owners, that notice should equally be sent to tenants within the notification area. Now, I can't see that this is problematic, and I can't see even that it's got a practical dimension that might be problematic for the municipality. I agree, of course, that the municipality will not have on file a list of tenants. Nonetheless, we experimented in the case I mentioned with how to give notice to tenants, and we found that it's very easy. We enlisted the cooperation of the managers of the apartment buildings, who either took the notices themselves and put them in mailboxes or allowed us to deliver the notices to the tenants door to door. It took virtually no time at all. It was very easy, and it clearly was fair to the tenants and allowed them the opportunity to participate fully in the process that was then afoot. By this time, of course, it was too late for the municipal council because the tenants didn't know about the municipal council decision. They were, however, notified about the appeal at the Utility and Review Board, and I assure the minister they all wanted to participate in the appeal at the Utility and Review Board. Now, I think I've set out what it is that's the problem here. Is I'm really encouraging the minister to think about ways in which notice could be put on equal footing as between owners and tenants. I think this is not problematic. I don't know if it's really come up for active discussion inside the Union of Nova Scotia Municipalities. But one way to spark this, of course, would be for the minister to go back and ask them whether they have a policy on this. They might have concerns over practicality, which I've tried to address here. But it's clearly the case that tenants are citizens. They have rights to vote, not just in provincial elections, but in municipal elections. And they have a right, if they knew about a hearing, to appear at the hearing and speak. But no one has a right if they don't know that a hearing is taking place. It's no comfort to them if they don't know about it. So what I'm suggesting is that here's an opportunity to think a little more broadly than has so far been set out in this legislation. Now, Mr. Speaker, I would like to turn, if I may now, to the fourth point of concern I have about this bill. And it has to do with non-conforming uses. Now, non-conforming uses are a very interesting example of the interaction of public rights and private rights. And here's how it works. I'm sure many members, probably all members, are familiar with this. When it comes to zoning, if the municipality changes the zoning on land, or perhaps introduces zoning for the first time, and the zoning that is introduced or put in place differs from the actual use that has been made of that land previously, then a dilemma arises. The question is, what should be the public policy with respect to what we call the non-conforming use? What was previously legal, either because it was unregulated or it was within the confines of what was regulated, has suddenly become, by declaration, by rezoning, or by introduction of zoning, at least on the face of it, illegal. Well, the answer uniformly across Canada has been to say, and to write into a statute so that it is not a discretion of the municipality, the uniform solution has been to say that any previously existing legal non-conforming use can continue to exist. And that's the compromise. The compromise is that it recognizes the private rights of the landowner to continue to use their land as a non-conforming use, if it was legally in use in a different way prior to the zoning. But it also recognizes that it's perfectly legal for the municipality to change the zoning. The trouble is, of course, that from the municipality's point of view, sorry, Mr. Speaker, is there time you'd like me to finish up?
Well, I was just wondering, with tomorrow being opposition day, if the honourable member would consider adjourning debate at this particular time, and if it could carry on perhaps on another day at the discretion of the government House Leader.
In exquisite detail on another day, Mr. Chairman. At this point, perhaps I'll just move adjournment of the debate. Thank you.
The motion is to adjourn debate. Is it agreed? Agreed. It is agreed. The Honourable the Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, before moving adjournment, we turn the final moments over to the Leader of the Official Opposition to detail the business for tomorrow and the hours for tomorrow.
The Honourable the Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to advise House that tomorrow we'll be dealing with two resolutions, resolutions number 289 and 443. I've previously given those two numbers to the Government House Leader and to the House Leader for the third party. The House will sit tomorrow between the hours of 2 and 6. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I move that the House do now rise to meet tomorrow at the hour of 2 in the afternoon.
The motion is that the House do now adjourn and sit tomorrow at the hour of 2 p.m. Is it agreed? It is agreed.